That year, Jonathan and I were high school freshmen, and aside from minor bullying and much more stuff to do, the school year started pretty normally. That is, until rumor had it that every night, babies were heard crying from the old shed next to the basketball court. This piqued our curiosity, so Jonathan and I decided to find out more about it and investigate. We took the opportunity of an evening basketball game to sneak into the backyard and explore the shed. To be more precise, it was an old, long-abandoned warehouse that had undergone renovation a few years ago. It was supposed to be turned into a gym, but in the end the local authorities vetoed the project. Since then, no one would venture there, not even the school security guards or teachers. The building was decrepit and sinister, and the outside lock was actually an exciting incentive for curious people such as us both to try and understand what was happening behind these large doors. We hid in the nearby empty swimming pool and waited until all the students and staff were gone. Around midnight, after much cheering and partying to celebrate the school team's victory, everyone had started leaving and, as expected, nobody noticed our absence. It soon became extremely quiet, save for a few chirping crickets and frogs, and we fully concentrated on the warehouse. Just as rumored, the wind in the backyard started blowing violently in the middle of the night, causing the trees and leaves to make rustling and chilling sounds. The shadows of the poplars created all sorts of strange and frightening shapes on the ground, and we couldn't help but watch them, totally enraptured by the eerie scene. But suddenly, a very distinct sound came from inside the warehouse. We both heard it very clearly, and it was unmistakable. It was the sound of children crying. Jonathan and I looked at each other and instinctively walked towards the shed to see if there were any children inside. Deep down, I wanted to believe this was merely the sound of a cat meowing, but when we cracked the lock open and pushed the door, it was completely dark inside. We used our cell phone flashlights and saw nothing unusual except for old, rotting pieces of furniture, dust everywhere, and cobwebs hanging from the ceiling beams. We were threading slowly, attempting to make as little noise as possible, and Jonathan was leading the way. After a few steps, Jonathan motioned me to stop and pointed to the corner of the warehouse. My gaze followed the direction of his index, and I saw the menacing silhouette of a large man. The darkness prevented us from seeing him clearly, but I mustered up my courage and I walked in his direction. As I approached, I realized that this was just an anatomy mannequin that had been left there along with maps, skulls, and an old globe. This came as a huge relief, but suddenly the sound of a crying baby came from right behind us. We immediately turned around to look and what? We couldn't believe our eyes. A naked toddler was crawling out from the corner and slowly moving on the dusty floor. His bulging eyes were protruding so much that they seemed to be falling out from their sockets. His bluish skin was covered in sores, and as he moved, we could see his distorted navel oozing pus. Jonathan and I were so scared and horrified that all we could do was scream from the top of our lungs and run towards the exit door. It took a while for us to dare look behind our backs, as we did not want to face that stomach-churning sight again. As we arrived outside, we bumped into the school's security guard, who had been alerted by the noises and our screams. He asked us what was wrong, and we managed to falter out an answer in unison. "There's a ghost in the abandoned shed." We then pointed in the direction of the decrepit building, but strangely, the door was locked as if no one had ever entered. I looked at the security guard, thinking that he would not believe us, but unexpectedly, his face looked really sad. He proceeded to tell us about the tragic event that had happened inside the old dilapidated shed. Some 20 years earlier, when the school had not been remodeled yet, a young female student unintentionally became pregnant following a short-lived relationship with another male student. The school had very strict rules regarding relationships between students. And for fear of being found out by the school and her own parents, the young girl managed to hide her pregnancy thanks to ample clothing. Later, as her pregnancy was nearing its term, she sneaked into the school in the middle of the night and went to the shed alone to give birth there. Once the baby was born, the young student panicked and ran away, clueless as to what to do, and leaving the newborn behind. The poor baby died of starvation and cold and was discovered a few days later by one of the school's maintenance workers. The latter had gone into the shed to pick up gardening tools and was startled by the stench wafting from a corner of the room. He fainted as he saw the decomposing corpse of the toddler being eaten away by critters and lying in a pool of bodily fluid. Following that sad story, and as the strange noises started coming out of the building at night, students and security guards alike would reassure themselves by insisting that they were merely stray cats meowing. Today, the warehouse is still abandoned, and the sound of the crying baby still lingers in the dark night. Jonathan and I used this tragic story to write an article for the school paper that all the students thoroughly enjoyed reading. But we pretended it was purely fiction and did not dare reveal it had in fact really happened.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. Recently, a very strange story came up on my school's forum. Rumor had it that a model skeleton from the biology lab would walk at night in the school's corridors. To corroborate this, I invited Leo and Mila, two friends from the press club, to bring a camera along and catch this peculiar occurrence on film. That night, none of us had any homework, so we made an appointment outside the cafeteria, and from there went to hide in a corner near the lab to begin filming. At midnight, the whole school was quiet, and we were ready with our well-prepared equipment to record that spooky sight once it would happen. However, after waiting for over an hour, we still had not seen any skeletons. Mila walked first, but suddenly she screamed. The skeleton had mysteriously disappeared. It was no longer standing in the right corner of the room, as it usually did. We went around the room several times, but we still couldn't find it. Leo suggested that we split the group up to go to other rooms and try to find the skeleton. God, I wish we hadn't separated then. Indeed, a very upsetting thing happened as Leo and Mila walked towards the end of the corridor. They were assaulted by a madman who had covered his head. He was hiding in a corner and suddenly hit them for no reason. At that moment, I was searching a nearby classroom, and as I was about to step out, I managed to witness everything. I was so scared that I crept into the corner of the room to hide, hoping that he would not find me. But no, I heard footsteps coming towards me, getting closer and closer. Then I heard him opening the door of the room where I was hiding. I was so afraid that he'd catch me. But all of a sudden, the sound of something falling came from another corner. This caught the man's attention, and he quickly turned his head towards it. Perhaps because he didn't find anything, he finally left. I heard his footsteps fade away, and the room fell silent again. I breathed a sigh of relief, but then I was startled by the sight of the skeleton waving at me from behind the window. For some reason, I had a feeling that it made that noise in order to distract the crazy man, and therefore save me. I rubbed my eyes again to make sure I wasn't dreaming, but the skeleton was gone. I then thought that perhaps the crazy man had not gone, so I ran into the biology lab to hide in a large box. This was surely the most disgusting thing I'd ever experienced. The box was full of frogs that had been disemboweled for experimental purposes, and their revolting stench kept wafting up my nose. However, I was sure Leo and Mila were waiting for me to save them. So I clenched my teeth and ventured outside the box. As I was stepping out, I faced a horrifying sight. A tall, unknown man was opening the door of the lab, dragging at once my two friends, Mila and Leo, inside. He laid Leo on the operating table, while Mila was on the next one. Both of them were unconscious. He then slowly lifted a scalpel and began dissecting Leo's body while laughing hysterically like a madman. What was going on? It was too horrific to handle, and I couldn't stop trembling, so much that my hands couldn't open the box to look outside. Still, I tried to stay calm and dial 911 to call the police. I then realized what an error it was to hide in this crazy cold freezer. I was shivering so much I didn't know how long I could endure these unholy temperatures. But I took a deep breath and tried once again to slightly open the door to see if the murderer had gone. This is when I saw him bringing the scalpel towards Mila. Suddenly, lightning started flashing outside the window, and a skeleton appeared, leaving the murderer standing, dumbfounded. I took this opportunity to quickly jump out and grab the closest fire extinguisher to smash his head. However, my clumsiness and haste caused me to slip on a pool of blood and fall on the floor. He rushed towards me, trying to strangle me, but by chance, the police were storming in just in time. Unfortunately, the madman had already managed to put a knife on my throat to try and control me. As he was about to stab me in the neck, a light suddenly flashed, once again coming from outside and surrounding a skeleton. Gunfire immediately rang out, and the police managed to shoot him down. It turned out that the psycho was in fact the head of the school's biology department. But a terrifying secret was later revealed. He was in fact schizophrenic, and while he was still capable of working very normally in the classroom, he would go crazy at night and run to the lab to dissect a series of frogs and mice. One evening, a student who had forgotten something in class went back to the lab and accidentally found out the freak's secret. The lunatic was dissecting the boy while he was still alive, just to keep him silent. The most frightening thing that haunted me for a while was that the student's body was found at the bottom of the freezer, covered with heaps of frog corpses, and that's precisely where I was hiding that evening. The whole school then rumored that his spirit ascended into the skeleton, and he spent his nights moving the skeletons in the lab to hint at and reveal the madman's crime.